The popcorn's
something
coming.
ready? Wait, we're going live and something's ready?
Dinner's about to be served. Apparently.
Live, and we lost our host. And he's back.
Dinner's in the oven.
Oh, that's awesome. Dinner's ready. Okay, we are live. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. Today is Thursday, day who knows what of the, are we in a lockdown? Are we not in a lockdown? We're no longer in a lockdown. Okay, but we are still faced with tons going on with the global pandemic and now civic unrest. This is called Perspectives, where we bring on our civic leaders to get their perspectives on what's going on and how is leadership doing, responding to everything that's going on in the world today. With me is my co-host, Alexis Dixon from Mediation Solutions International. And we also invited back Chris Williams because he did an amazing job when he came on about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, to the Ask Dr. Cat episode. And we just wanted to bring him back, and he is amazing and connected us with tonight's two guests. So we have Sara Jacobs, who is running for Congress. She is running to replace Representative Susan Davis. And then we also have Cory Briggs, who's going to be running for San Diego City Attorney. So thank you all so much for taking time. I know that a lot of you want to be at the beach. You can finally be at the beach en masse, we hope. But here we are to discuss just what the heck is going on out there and how these two plan to just stand up and be leaders in this time of uncertainty when we really, really are looking for leaders. So here we go. I'm going to start with the first question, the first zinger. Why lead, right? A lot of times we forget that when you're a leader, you're a public servant. So what is it that is motivating you, especially with all this turmoil to be leaders and to run for offices here in San Diego in the state of California? Should we start with the lady, Sara?
Sure. Well, it's a great question. And you know, for me, I have known from an early age that I benefited from a system that wasn't necessarily fair and that San Diego had given me and my family a lot. I went to local public schools. My dad went to UCSD, my mom went to San Diego State. And so I always felt like it was my responsibility to give back and to do everything I can to make sure that every kid in San Diego has access to the kinds of opportunities that I had. And honestly, in this moment that we're in, where it feels like so everything is so important and the decisions we make right now are going to have such a lasting impact, I really feel like we need a new generation of leaders and more young people around the table, because at the end of the day, we're the ones who are going to be dealing with the consequences of those decisions longer than anybody else. So we should be part of making them.
And you do look pretty young to me. I mean, I know this is something
younger than I think.
Well, you got a baby face. I mean, I'm just saying, it's refreshing. It is refreshing. I think, yes, I think we're looking for the next generation and for the young leaders to step forward and emerge. And I see that a lot of that has happened since COVID, right? Because of people have had to pivot, and those that are able to be agile can keep on going and reinvent themselves. So welcome. Yeah. All right, Cory, your turn.
So can I get carded? Do I look old enough to be here?
Let's see. Let me see that baby face.
Yeah, exactly. I have a face for radio, but thanks for having me anyway. A smart person would look around and see all the turmoil and say, yeah, I'm not interested in public service. You can't blame people for looking at this and saying, I don't, why would I want to do something about it? But the reality is that there's a time when everybody has to step up. I didn't step up because of what's happening today. I stepped up because of what was happening a year ago. And I did it for things that happened 50 and 60 years ago. I did it because of my grandparents and my parents. They were public servants. They did their part, not for fame or fortune, but because that's what you do, right? You look around and you see there's always a niche to fill in the community, and they did it, and that's just what I learned. They were my role models, and so I don't know any other way. I've been fortunate enough to I have a job that allows me to make a difference. I have clients who want to make a difference and are willing to trust me with some important things. And so I'm privileged to go to the one place where there's the least amount of politics in our system, right? The court system. There's politics in the legislature, there's politics in the executive. Surely there's politics in the judiciary, but it's the least political and it's the most transparent. And I get to go there and advocate on behalf of the public. And so, when you see that there's a lack of leadership, a lack of advocacy for moving the public's agenda forward, it's hard to just sit by and not do something about it. So that's why I'm in the race.
Yeah. Hi, Sarah. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you just spoke about a system that you benefited from that at the expense of others. You didn't use that language, but there's a system that you spoke about that certainly favored you. I would like for you, as this fresh young face, to really define what that system is, and if you were to be elected to office, what you would do about it to create equity.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's not one system, it's a series of interlocking systems, right? My grandfather went to college on scholarships and was able to graduate with a PhD without student loan debt, got a job teaching at MIT and then UCSD, and was able to start a company. All of those things were because there were entities and people and systems that could pay for his college and get him a scholarship. My family is Jewish, so it's not that we necessarily came from the same kinds of privilege that, other families have, but certainly the fact that, he could do all those things, I think I have obviously benefited from. I went to a great public school. Not all public schools are as great as the one I went to. And, I think we need to fix that. I also think we need to look at some of the historical decisions that were made that enabled certain families to acquire wealth and not others. Not only the history of slavery that built this country, but also the fact that the post-World War II GI Bill was not really accessible for, Black veterans, that we had redlining that meant that Black families couldn't build housing wealth in the same way that other families could. Here in San Diego, actually, my great-grandparents, when they first moved here, they lived in College area because that's one of the few places that Jewish families were allowed to live. So I think it's a series of different systems that interlock that have created a system that I am very grateful for everything that I have been given and that I have been able to achieve. But I also recognize that with that comes a lot of responsibility to build a system that's fair.
What would be the mechanics of that? What would be 2 or 3 things you would do to bring systemic shift, to create greater equity?
Mm-hmm. So I think, at the federal level, there's a few things we need to do there. I think we need to do a commission on reparations and really think about what kinds of specific programs we need to do to redress those historical wrongs, like no or low interest housing loans from HUD, HUD grants for down payments so that families who live in historically redlined areas can start to build that housing wealth in a way that had been historically denied them. I also think we need to look at our tax code. We know even before the 2017 Republican tax bill that our tax system at the federal level is, benefits the wealthy and penalizes those who are less wealthy. Even if you look at tax enforcement, you have the predominance of tax enforcement at the IRS happening on people who are making a mistake filing their earned income tax credit versus the big tax evasion that we know at scale. So we need to make our tax code more equitable and make sure that everyone is paying their fair share into the system that they're benefiting from. And then lastly, we need to look at how the money is distributed. So we know that our education formulas are not that equitable. That's a thing that happens at the state level, but at the federal government, we could use block grants and Title I funding to try and balance out that and make it more equitable. We need to look at, in addition to running for Congress, I'm the chair of San Diego for Every Child, which is a countywide initiative on childhood poverty here in San Diego County. And we know that accessing the services and help that people need when they're experiencing hardship is really hard. We need to make it easier for people to get the help that they need. We need to fix our safety net that right now is very broken. And we need to make people realize, a lot of middle class and upper class families, they get help from the government too. It's just kind of hidden in the tax code. It's not something you have to go and apply for or go and get. But that's not the case for families who are experiencing hardship. We make them jump through all these hoops. We have all of these requirements that really make it hard for them to access what they need.
Where are you? Chris, sorry, I apologize. Sarah, tell me about reparations. Where do you stand on reparations?
That's what Chris was going to ask.
That's where I was going.
Well, Chris, you asked the question then.
No. That it got asked. I thought that was very interesting that you started off with reparations, and so I would love to see your point of view as someone who would assist in these type of bills going in front of the president. How would you go about that? How would you enact reparations if you have the power just to wave a wand?
Well, it's a really good question. And I have to say, as someone who I think we talked about before, Alexis, I have a master's degree in international conflict resolution, and I worked at the UN and at the State Department in the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. And one of the things I learned working and studying all of these places that have gone through trauma is that you really have to address the past before you can really move forward. And that's something our country has not really done. So I think we need a truth and reconciliation process that actually brings to the fore and starts to address the historical wrongs. And as part of that, I support HR 40, which is a bill that Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has introduced that would create a commission to study reparations and to introduce a plan for Congress to enact. I mean, truthfully, I don't think I should be the one deciding what reparations looks like. I support it, but I think that the community affected should be the ones who decide what is the right and what feels like a reparation to them.
Cory, what's your thoughts on this, and how could the city attorney of San Diego participate in these discussions?
So the first question Alexis asked was, what do you do structurally? What's the foundational thing? My big issue in government is transparency. And it's the thing that a city attorney can do more than any other official. So
why is that? Sorry, just
so,
asking for a friend.
Yeah, no. Fair enough. The reason is because the transparency we have is a legal requirement. We actually have constitutional rules and statutory rules and local rules that require transparency. And it's through good lawyering that you get good results. So let me say a few things. Some people don't know what the city attorney's office does, so let me just detour for a moment and then come back. The job has three parts. One part is representing the city in court. The other one is advising the mayor and the city council and the various departments. There are a few parts of the government, like the ethics commission, that the city attorney doesn't work for, but otherwise it's the lawyer for the city. And the third thing, and it's a hot topic now, and I suspect we'll talk about it today, is prosecuting misdemeanors and infractions. So that's what our city attorney does in the city of San Diego. The city attorney works on transparency issues all the time. If you go to a city council meeting, you have probably noticed that people are allowed to speak and they get a certain amount of time and they fill out a card. Materials have to be provided ahead of time. Those are all things that come from legal requirements. And before those meetings happen, the lawyers have looked at everything to make sure that the public is being given the information to which it's entitled. Outside of meetings like that, there are requirements that the public turn over information, that the government turn over information when the public asks. And very often when people are asking for things that politicians might not want the public to see, they end up in the lawyer's office. And it's the lawyer's job to say, no, the rules require this to be turned over. And that comes not from the rule itself, but from the oath that the lawyers took when they became lawyers to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. If you have a bar card, you took that oath. And it is lawyers, a politician screws up and the politician gets voted out of office. The lawyer screws up and the lawyer loses his or her meal ticket. So it's a pretty serious thing. And in government, if you are a doctor and you screw up, you could lose your license. If you're an accountant, you screw up, or an architect, you screw up, you could lose your license. In government, lawyers who screw up not only can be voted out of office, but they can lose their licenses. So there's this heightened level of responsibility. And it's directed it's also self-interest, but it's directed toward making sure that we follow the rules. What separates us from a lot of places around the world is that we have a rule-based system, and people have agreed that however bad things get, we're going to follow the rules. I just heard somebody talking about what's going on in Atlanta with the shooting and the prosecution of the officers. And the interviewer asked the lawyer, says, do you feel confident that there'll be conviction? And the person says, I'm paraphrasing, he says essentially, all we have are the rules. And if the rules don't give us the right outcome, we need to go change the rules. But we're stuck with the rules. That's our system, right? We resolve conflict through adopting policies and implementing them through rules. So the thing that I think has to be done in our city government, I'm not running for Congress, and I look forward to seeing the Reparations Commission do its work. I'm glad I'll be observing and not sitting on that dais, is that everything needs to be out in the open. There's just no reason for anything in government to be a secret. And there are a few things, law enforcement investigating, child abuse or something like that. But the day-to-day operations, there's no reason any of this should be private. And yet we have politicians and at this point, a city attorney who works really hard to keep things secret. I think if they knew what was going on, they would take a more active role. And let me just say this, Chris, and then you can do your thing. Imagine where we would be if we didn't have video cameras right now. Imagine what the public conversation would be like if people didn't have a glimpse into what happens on our streets. We should have that glimpse in all aspects of government every day. The boring stuff too. But we don't have that. And I think we should. I think the public deserves to know what's happening at City Hall. That's my contribution, Alexis, the structural change.
I think Chris has a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I think you really answered it there. Are you committed to the taxpayers to say that we're willing to share this information without having to be asked for it? Because a lot of the public don't even understand what to ask for. Mm-hmm. So if you're sharing this information willingly, I think that goes a long way into transparency. And are we getting that commitment from you if you're city attorney?
So look, in the interest of transparency,
I think that's the yes or no, counselor.
Yeah, the answer is yes. In the interest of transparency, everybody should know that Chris is one of my clients, and Chris and I didn't prepare for today. So,
but Chris, you're really good at this. Okay, you found your calling.
But the answer is yes. But it's not just being transparent; It's helping people understand the transparency. A city attorney is the lawyer for the city. That means I'm the lawyer for the residents too. So if you want to know what's going on in your government, it's not simply that we should give you what you ask for. If you don't know what to ask for, we should also help you get it. Lawyers are also counselors. And when people come to us with a problem, it's not just our job to give them an answer, it's our job to help them understand the nature of the problem and what their options are and what the various ways are that we could go about resolving it. Sometimes there's not a good answer. There's just a host of bad answers. But good lawyers don't just say yes or no. They also tell you, this is the way things work. This is the way you could make the most of it. If you had a transparent city attorney's office, that the leader in that office would be making sure that the public is educated about things like land use planning and budgeting and pay disparities and all sorts of things, not because the lawyer's the decision maker, that's done by the mayor and the city council, but so that the public can interface with their mayor and their city council and make positive contributions to the outcome. If you go to a city council meeting right now, the God's honest truth is that 99% of the time, it's kabuki theater because the decision has already been made. You go there to say, this is what I think, but it's already been decided by the people who can afford to have lawyers and lobbyists working the process for years before that big day. That's
so in the sake of time, I know you're a good lawyer because you are very broad in answering the question we've asked you, but we only have an hour and we want to ask you both quite a bit. In the sake of transparency, where do you stand and how do you define and what would you do in respect to defunding the police, which really the word is a misnomer because we're not talking about defunding the police. So Sarah, where do you stand in respect to defunding the police, and also you, Cory? Sarah, do you want to take that on?
Sure, happy to. I mean, first thing I should say is that Congress has very little to do with funding. It's really something the individual city council decides. Now, I think that it's clear that both in San Diego and across the country, we need to really take a hard look at our budgets and rebalance and reprioritize. I think we need to demilitarize our police and redirect funding from those budgets to things like homeless outreach and mental health care and substance use issues that we know and the police know that they are not, best placed or best trained or equipped to be handling those issues. And right now we're asking them to do that. I also think there's a lot we can do from the federal level that make sure that we're not sending big military equipment to our local police forces, that make sure we're setting national standards around training and use of force reporting. I think we need a national ban on chokeholds and a carotid restraint. So there's a lot we can do at the federal level, recognizing that at the end of the day, as I'm sure Cory will tell you, in terms of the police, most of what needs to be done is at the local level.
Cory, where are you in respect to that, and what can be done locally in a very short period of time?
If folks want to know my detailed views, I wrote an op-ed in the UT. It ran on Sunday. You can go check that out. Okay. Sarah, I think you had one there too. Yeah. So folks can go see that. As a city attorney, it's not my decision to decide how much they should be funded. It is my job to make sure that everybody knows exactly what the money's being spent on and what the options are. That's part of the transparency. So I'll give you an example. We currently negotiate with the police unions. The unions put provisions in the contracts that protect bad cops. And the city attorney never tells the public about that. We're now having a conversation, right, in the middle of 2020 about protections for bad cops. But we've had bad cops for a long time. Good cops hate bad cops. But we've had a political relationship with the leaders and the unions that keep that stuff masked. It should be disclosed so that when those contracts come up, the public is told, these are the things in the contract that say A, B, and C, and they mean X, Y, and Z. And then the public can look at it and say, hey, we like that or we don't like that. That's the public's role. My job as a city attorney is to make sure people know that. I will tell you that I've been a city hall watcher. I've been suing the city for nearly 20 years on behalf of the public. For a long time, even before I came to San Diego, politicians have been neglecting serious social issues. They haven't funded them for whatever reason. Democrat, Republican, people of all political stripes have ignored serious problems. And then they get to a fevered pitch, and the solution is easy. Give it to the cops, because public safety is always popular at the ballot box. And we've put such a burden on the police departments that you can't expect them to do everything well. This is not to excuse anything, but we have to recognize collectively that our political leadership has saddled police officers with a whole bunch of baggage where nobody could perform well. And until we have that conversation, Sarah was talking about this with reparations and truth and reconciliation, until we're prepared to have a conversation about what is the right way to go about achieving certain social ends and how much we're willing to spend on it, you can't ask how much we should be spending on the police. Because the real question is, what do we want to accomplish and how much are we willing to pay for it? There are probably cheaper ways of doing what we've asked the police officers to do, and safer.
Yeah, I want to push back a little bit on that. This is not a new conversation. We don't need a commission to study this. You look at the list of just Black men who've died within the last 3 months. It's certainly of men. Yeah. So I don't think we need a commission to study this. I think there's systemic things that have certainly been identified. No one wants to hate the police. People really, the anger you see in the streets is really people inviting the police officers to really be good community citizens. We empower you to come into our cities to really do a job that is critical. Nobody wants to hate a chef. Nobody wants to hate a cop. Nobody wants to hate an engineer. Right. But I think it's not unfair for the public to demand that chefs do their jobs well. Engineers do that.
That's exactly well. Right.
Cops do their jobs well. So when I hear people talk about hating the police or wanting to defund the police, I think, what's driving that? And it's nothing other than a plea from the public to, because the job is so difficult, can you get the best and the brightest to come out there, pay them well, train them well, and have them come in and be a part of our society, just like every other profession is invited to do. And I think it's at its most fundamental. But what I'm looking for is, what are the top 3 things we can do systemically, in very short term to really affect change? Could those be?
So where are you pushing back?
I know you're at the federal level and you have a different role, but sorry, say that again?
I was just asking, where are you pushing back? Because I agree with you.
Okay, lovely.
You said you wanted to push back. This is the point I was trying to make.
I guess what I'd love to hear is, here's the top 3 things I think, even though my position is limited in its capacity to implement any policy, at least from this seat, here's what I'd love to see the city do in the short term. Here are 3 systemic things I think can happen in a very short period of time.
Full disclosure. Along with the full disclosure, there should be a complete analysis of the pros and cons, the costs and benefits, and the alternatives to what we're doing. All of that should be put out there, and it should be done far enough in advance and provided in a format that a critical mass of the public can understand what's going on, so you can have a meaningful debate and discussion at City Hall. Transparency, full disclosure, and a critical mass of people involved in the conversation. It can't just be a few riled up folks who are extremely frustrated, who don't understand how it is we got to that point in terms of dollars, in terms of policies. Everybody's got to be on the same page. And the public doesn't know all that's going on. And the politicians get away with a lot because we're not informed. We're kept in the dark, and it's wrong.
Go ahead. Amanda, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I had to unmute myself. One of the joys of hosting while I'm still in lockdown pretty much, is having the kids upstairs. I mean, I think it really, what we're driving to is everyone needs to be educated, right? So for me, step one is how do we educate people on what is going on what's the past? And I think, you know, discussions like this is one fine example of people coming together, having an open discussion and streaming it live so others can start to educate themselves. So I'm not sure, I wish I had the answers, but I think number one is we've got to start educating about what you're saying, Cory, the truth, right? And that requires transparency. Does anyone else though? Like, I mean, maybe we could flip it and ask what Sara or maybe yourself or Cory, or not Cory, but rather Chris, if you guys have some ideas.
I would love to hear, because you are right. People are misinformed in regards to what defunding the police means, at least in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
You know, and it's not to abolish the police. We need good police officers out there. And as Alexis mentioned, let's pay those good ones more. Let's train them more. Let's make sure it's more about community policing. But I think logically, one of the reasons why defunding police is coming up is not necessarily just because it's the police. You know, obviously there's some systematic issues that must be addressed, and these things are being brought up to the forefront now. But really it boils down to the economics. And economically, some of the things that are happening in regards to not just the police, but the unions and the pensions are where we are seeing you know, literally cities bear the weight of these outdated philosophies. And so what can we do on a federal level or on any level? Maybe, Cory, you have an answer to this, to address the issues of pensions, because that's really where a lot of the economics boils down to. Now, I know both of you are running for office, and this is an interesting question for labor. But I think if we can come up with a solution, you know, to this issue, we can start, you know, balancing the budget, because it's not just police officers, but it's what we're paying for that comes with the police officers. And right now, you know, pension is an incredible weight on many cities across this United States. So what's your thought on that, Sara? What can be done on a federal level to address that? And then Cory, maybe you can answer on a local level. What can we do in regards to the pensions? Because we're bringing up defunding police because in most municipalities, they are the number one expense. So in any household, logically, you'd look at your biggest expense to see if that's where we can begin to reallocate some funds. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, Chris, I appreciate the question. The honest answer is it really is the local governments who negotiate all of these things. At the federal level, you know, we saw in the CARES Act that there was federal funding to help state and local governments during this economic crisis be able to balance their budgets. I think it's clear we need more federal assistance to state and local governments. The House passed a bill, the HEROES Act, that does provide more of that assistance. It hasn't yet passed the Senate. It's unclear if it will. I think it's also important when we look at the CARES Act funding that we want to make sure it's going to helping to address the public health and economic crisis that we're in, and not just plugging budget holes that, you know, existed separate from COVID-19. And, you know, I think it's also important to look at these budgets, as you're saying. So actually, education funding is separate. The city doesn't control education funding. It comes from the state to the school districts. And we know that education has been underfunded and consistently underfunded. Actually, this new state budget coming up has cuts to education. And what we can do there at the federal government is make sure that we're actually giving the federal dollars to education that are already federally mandated. So for for students with disabilities, the federal government is supposed to pay around 40% of the cost of accommodations. Right now, the federal government pays about 12%. So just making sure that we're actually allocating the funding that's already in the federal bills around that, making sure that we're increasing funding for Title I schools, that we're trying to push the states to do more equitable funding formulas. That's the kind of thing we can do at the federal level.
Chris, the budgeting at the local level and in San Diego in particular is a bit of a joke. The finances is a scam perpetrated on the public. Every year for the last several years, we find out toward the end of our fiscal year, which is July to June. Sometime in late winter, early spring, we find out from the pension board that we're going to have to come up with extra money that wasn't in the budget. We don't tell the public what it's actually going to cost us looking forward. We just get a bill afterward. We got $250 million from the federal government in CARES money, roughly $250 million. Imagine if we hadn't had a pandemic. We were going to be tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in the hole. We were going there anyways before the pandemic. In some ways, the pandemic and the federal assistance became a bailout. It's a one-time bailout. We're going to have a problem again next year and the year after that. We have a budget, deferred maintenance backlog on capital improvements in the city of San Diego, somewhere between $2 and $5 billion that doesn't appear on our annual financial statements. We don't tell that to Wall Street. But if you read the local newspapers, you know it. And if you read the reports that the IBA and other, the independent budget analyst and others issue, you can cobble it together. We don't tell the public that we are in serious financial problem. That's not right. And so the first thing we should do is tell the public this is how far on the hole we are. You know, that Alexis, you were telling me that you do some mediation counseling for families. I don't do divorces, but my friends who do divorces, the number one issue that gets couples in trouble is money. And, you know, somebody opens the credit card bill and finds out that somebody went on a shopping spree or whatever. We're not telling the public how we spend our money. We move money around. You'll know if you follow the news that these politicians will come up with pet projects, and they manage to come up with money for them. They manage to cobble the money together to do these things that they want to do. And yet they're talking about closing libraries and parks and things like that. It's because we're just fundamentally dishonest. That has to change. We have capital improvement programs, pure water we're working on. We need to upgrade our water system. It was expected to cost somewhere between $2 and $3 billion. We put that in our annual financial report a couple years ago. Voice of San Diego did a story where the costs and the overruns and the delays were likely to push the price tag somewhere in the $8 to $9 billion range. And what did the city do? They removed that line item from the next year's financial reports. They just took it out. This is fundamentally dishonest. And that has to change. The city attorney is involved with the disclosures committee for the city. If I'm on it, I'm going to make sure everybody knows exactly where we stand financially, because you can't fix it, right? You can't add a story to the house if you don't know what the foundation is, right? We have a broken foundation, but we don't know the full extent of the damage. And yet we want to continue to add stories to the house. And that's a problem. The budget problem, Chris, you brought up, you know, I remember 10 years ago, maybe more than 10 years ago, the mayor at that time and some union leaders and other people stood up and said, we reached a compromise, we've cut a deal, we're going to start making payments toward the budget deficit, and it's going to be gone in a couple of decades. And it's getting worse. It's not going away, it's getting worse. It's somewhere close to $3 billion right now. That's, you know, our budget this year is $3.5 billion roughly. So basically close to a year's worth of money, we're in the hole. I just don't know how you responsibly build a 21st century world-class city with everything that San Diegans are entitled to if we're not honest with San Diegans about where we stand financially.
Sarah, I want to ask you a question. Thank you, Cory. I appreciate that. And I hear the height of transparency that you will bring to the position. And so I have a question for you. But first, I want to ask Sarah a personal question and give you an opportunity to address it head on. One of the criticisms of you is that, and I really want you to answer this head on because I've heard it a few times, is that you're buying the election, that you're not as familiar with your constituency as you should be, and that you're a child of privilege, and so this opportunity is here, and perhaps because of your privilege, you're able to do something that your heart may not be fully engaged in. That this is something that you do because you can. Can you speak to that, and can you address those people who may have that perception of you, and tell them who you really are in respect to how they may have perceived you?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that I have been very blessed in my life, and that San Diego has given me and my family so much. And it's why I've dedicated my life to service, whether that was working at the State Department in the Obama administration or at UNICEF, or, for the past year and a half, founding and chairing a countywide initiative on childhood poverty here in San Diego. And I really do feel like it's my responsibility to do everything I can to use the advantages I've been given to make sure that every kid has access to the kinds of opportunities that I had. And, I'm very grateful that I had those opportunities and that I'm able to run a campaign that communicates directly with voters. One of the things we really prided ourselves on during the primary was that we had a paid internship program so that kids who don't normally get the opportunity to get experience working in politics because they're often unpaid internships were able to get their first experience, which goes a long way towards your next job. We paid all of our staff a living wage. We had 3 offices, one of which was in Skyline, and we heard from so many folks in the community how impactful it was to have an office in their community, that they felt like they didn't normally get that kind of attention from these bigger races. And I will say, I think what we saw in the primary is that, Tom Steyer, Michael Bloomberg, money is important until we fix campaign finance reform, and being able to communicate is important. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a message that resonates with voters, no amount of communication or messaging or money is going to overcome that. And I think if you look at the results from the primary, I won over 300 precincts. I won, almost every precinct in Chula Vista, in Lemon Grove, in La Mesa, in El Cajon, in parts of the district that don't often feel like they get the kind of attention from political leaders that they deserve. And, I'm very proud of the broad coalition of support that we've built. And, I think for me, the most important thing, I don't expect people to agree with me on everything. For me, the most important thing is that people can trust me. And for better or for worse, right now, we have a very broken campaign finance system. And, I'm only beholden to the voters and the constituents in my district. And I think that in a lot of ways gives me a lot of power to really change the system.
What are your top 3 priorities? Tell the voters right now, because you are young, you're a new face, you're a fresh face. What are your top 3 priorities if you were to be elected for this office? And what are the values that drives you? What are the values that drives you? And what are the priorities that you would hit if you were to win this position?
Yeah, the values that drive me are really, how do we make the world more equitable so that future generations are better off than we are? And in the primary, the 3 issues we talked the most about were climate change, gun violence prevention, and the high cost of living for families here in San Diego. Truthfully, I think that the next Congress is only going to be able to do COVID-19 economic response and stimulus, and maybe hopefully a criminal justice reform bill if one hasn't passed already. And so the key will be actually figuring out how we get our other priorities into that economic stimulus, how we make sure that we're designing that stimulus package in a way that incentivizes lowering carbon emissions, that prioritizes companies that have emissions targets in line with the Paris Accords, making sure we're thinking about that economic recovery in a way that builds a more equitable economy and society. To me, a really big component of that is our childcare system. Even before this crisis, we know that families in San Diego had a hard time accessing and affording the childcare that they needed. We also know that childcare tends to be done by underpaid female, often immigrant workforce. And so if we can build a childcare system that are good paying jobs and that provide families the care that they need, I think that will go a long way in creating both better circumstances for the future generations because they'll have quality early childhood education, which we know is incredibly important, and for families and for these workers.
I would like to address Sarah's position there, Alexis. I think that was extremely articulate for you to bring it up because that's obviously, first off, Sarah, I don't think anyone's mentioned it, but your family is responsible for Qualcomm. So I think as a Black man, that we should welcome the Sara Jacobs in the world, to help move the needle forward because she may have come from a lot of wealth, which all of mothers and fathers hope to do what her grandfather has been able to do for her family. And she's out here using that privilege, talking about reparations, people. I mean, that is awesome. And I think we should give kudos and ask for more people with the financial means, with the heart behind it, to get behind the movement of equality and equity, and allow people that look like ourselves, though, Alexis, to lead that movement and use some of that money and some of those financial benefits and advantages to propel our ideas in our communities. I live in the college area, and let's give credit where credit's due to the Jacobs family for what they do to the community. So I just want to say that we should not be ashamed of success. Well, hopefully, Sarah, you teach others, your family teach others how to obtain that success. And we do it in the communities that are underprivileged and marginalized. So thank you for taking your money and talking about things like reparations. That's awesome.
Well, Chris has set the bar very high there, Sarah. You set the bar extremely high for you. I think, let me speak to that, Chris, and I'm glad you said that. I think the invitation to all white people in this moment is the invitation to, if you are indeed will be offered privilege, the invitation is to use the privilege for equity, right? The first thing is to recognize that I indeed have privilege, and I respect you for owning that and recognizing that, and recognize you come from a system that gives that to you. I also will speak to Chris, not just to you, Sarah, but for you also to invite all white people of power and privilege, which all white people have by nothing other than the virtue of the color of their skin, but to invite them to use that privilege for equity and to create an equitable world. And so I'm glad that you're standing before us today and actually talking about using that privilege to create equity in the world. And so that's a very high bar, and you've said it, and we're going to hold you to it. Should we hold you accountable for that?
Please.
Okay. Amanda, I know you probably want to ask a question, and I don't want to dominate.
No, it's just as you guys, like, this is the beauty, because everyone's like, oh, well, you host a show, so you research and you have your questions. And no, because I want the authenticity of a virtual social club. I want that freshness, and as if this is the first time I've met Sarah, and it is virtually, and this is the first time I've met Cory. Now, while I had the assumption that, oh, maybe she's a Jacobs, I didn't even care to look that up, right? I just wanted to meet her as a person without doing the research on her. And I just think, yes, it is wonderful. I do know your grandpa, right? So I remember one time we were sitting and I think we were in Salk, and my son was right next to me, and I'm like, oh, please just behave. But I've seen your grandparents many, many times up at the cafe and at events, supporting the Torrey Pines Mesa. But I think, you made the choice. You could have chosen any other path, right? And like you're saying, with the privilege that you have and you're recognizing it, but you've chosen to be of service. And so I think people should be respectful. And I apologize that people assume, you're winning because of this or you're winning because of that. No, it's public service is not a pretty lifestyle, right? And I know Cory, probably the same thing. Your family, you come from a line of public servants, right? This is not all fun and games. There's a huge price you pay when you put yourself out there publicly, and especially as a politician and a servant for the people. So I just want to say thank you for making that decision. And also, I'm a white woman too. So, there was a discussion that Chris and I had when we first met offline. And it is, what do we as white people who are born, with a color of skin that gives us privilege that we didn't expect and we didn't ask for, but we do have, and we talk about this a lot, we acknowledge it, but what do we do with it, right? And I think so a lot of us are, how do we help? And I think this is one way, and you choosing to be a public servant, and Cory as well. This is how we give back and how we try and make that change and build a system that's more equitable. And maybe it starts with us, and our hope is that the future generations that come are more representative of people as a whole, right? So,
Cory, Amanda talks about public service, and one of the things that we all know about you is your style is not subtle. I don't think anyone would say Cory Briggs is a subtle man. They'll say many, many things about you, but that they shan't say about you. And you smile because you know it is also true. How do you, as a political person running for an office that is not political, ensure that you don't politicize the office? And I know you'd spoken to that a bit earlier through the narrative of transparency. But if we had several people here looking at the history of city attorneys, most people would say they had politicized the office. And so how do we invite you to not allow your style or the power of the office take you away from what is most germane to the office, and that is representing the citizens of San Diego and protecting their interests?
So what I hear you very diplomatically saying is that the rap is on me as I'm a little rough around the edges.
I didn't say that. I said you're not so.
But
we like that here. We like that here.
But so here's a little truth that I have to own. I represent a lot of people who are not well known in the city. They're just regular folks. And their grievances are absolutely legitimate. And the powers that be don't listen to them. And so if sometimes it pisses me off and I let that show, I can't help it. I'm a human. And I'm their advocate. They don't get to speak in court. I do. And I sometimes wear it on my sleeve. And it is who I am. I'm not going to BS folks. And when the public is being harmed, when the public is being lied to, and the consequences are significant, it shows. I can't pretend that things aren't bad or things aren't serious when in fact they are, because I'm not political.
Cory,
so,
forgive me.
Yeah, sure.
Can style get in the way of the issue? Can style I'm not asking you to lose your passion or to lose the ferocity with which you go after the issues, but is there a time where style may divert attention away from the substance of the issue?
Well, I'm curious.
And I'm not asking you this as a lawyer. I'm not asking you this because I have an answer. I'm asking you this in this organic moment because there is something about having passion. I certainly hope Sara has a passion beyond this moment for reparations and for her commitment to her community should she be elected. I certainly don't want to diffuse your passion in any form of fashion at all. I'm just simply asking if sometimes the style can be a diversion from the substance of what it is you're trying to do. And the answer may be no, and it may be yes, but I'm asking in earnest.
Well, I took you to be earnest, and I appreciate the question, and I get it a lot. But sometimes people confuse my willingness to fight for average people as somehow having a rough style. If being prepared, if being passionate, if being effective is rough around the edges and people confuse that with style, I can't help that. I care about making sure that the public's agenda is moved forward. I care about making sure that the people who can't afford to donate to candidates, who can't afford to take off time from work and sit in the city council chambers for 8 hours, that all of those folks get every right and privilege that the law gives them. They're entitled to that. They demand that, but they can't exercise it for reasons beyond their control. And I get the privilege of representing them. And so if my style is to demand that City Hall and the politicians are transparent, that they honor people's rights, if that's a rough style, I own it. Right? I don't think you're going to find anybody who, I'm not, the folks who criticize me the most are usually the people who are on the losing side of those court battles. And they have the money to launch, smear campaigns against me. And they've done that. Your viewers should go to BriggsLawCorp.com and read my blog. I'm sorry.
We'll do that. Yeah, we'll definitely list your blog.
Yeah, there was some.
There's an echo. There's an echo in either somebody has a telephone on or something on.
Yeah, there's some echo. Anyways, so no, I appreciate the question. The answer is, and we haven't really gotten to the answer. I've answered an earlier question. The answer to your question is that full transparency, having a management team where they're all lawyers, as opposed to the current city attorney who has a non-lawyer as the chief of staff, a former political operative from the mayor. All of my management will be licensed attorneys who've taken an oath to uphold the law. We will be fully transparent. We are going to have an anti-corruption unit where we prosecute public officials who break the law. We're going to have a residents advisory committee where regularly and publicly they get to ask me anything they want to know about the job we're doing. We're going to turn transparency in the city on its head, where everything is public unless the law prohibits it from being public. That's how you keep me from falling into the trap of wanting to be political, to the extent I have any desire to. I'm a human, right? A lot of good people go into public service and they end up going in a political direction, right? There's something about the gravity of the job that takes people there. The way you minimize that, I can't say I avoid it 100%. I'm not naive. But the way I minimize it is to make sure that my constituents know everything that's going on when it's happening in real time as much as possible, so that they can say, Cory, are we doing this for the right reasons? Is this the right thing to do? And my measure of success, Alexis, is not whether I win another election. It wasn't on my bucket list to do this. I did this because the city is currently served by an unethical, not competent city attorney who has let lots of things go bad on her watch. She's not prosecuted a single dishonest police officer. Those are all things that could be done differently. Just yesterday, she said that she will not.
Cory, you're going to do that?
I will do. That's the anti-corruption unit. Okay. There's no reason under the sun for the city attorney to have the names of dishonest police officers and tell the public that it's in the public's best interest for those names to remain secret. That's unconscionable.
I know we're coming up at the end of time, Cory, but I want to, because what you're saying is very important to these times right now. So you're saying, as a city attorney who has a responsibility, you are the go-to or the in-between with the people and the police officers, correct? As the city attorney?
The city attorney negotiates on behalf of the city with the police unions, yes.
Yes. So let's say an incident happened. There's a video. You received the video from a good Samaritan who was horrified about what they saw transpired with an officer. They send it in to the city attorney. When will the public get an opportunity to view that video, since they will be the ones responsible for any lawsuits? If you're city attorney, when do we get to see that video? Is it 9 months from now? Are you going to hold us up? Or are you going to get us that video as soon as it is legally able to be released?
The answer is at the earliest possible moment. I'm laughing because you make it sound like the city attorney's office will be the first people to see the video. In 2020, we'll be the last people to see the video because it'll be on Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook Live or wherever it is. Look, the public is entitled to know what's going on in the city. I have to tell you, and I'm sorry to get on my soapbox on this. When you have a license to practice law, you sometimes have to go into court and tell judges things you wish you didn't have to tell them. But the truth is more important than winning. Right? Justice is more important than a conviction. If I know that somebody is a dishonest police officer, I could lose my license if I allow that person to testify in court. Now ask yourself, how in good conscience as a lawyer could you know that somebody is not honest enough to testify in court, and you don't do everything in your power to make sure that person is not patrolling the streets? I see a huge disconnect there.
Well, so Cory, are you one of the very few city attorneys? Because you said, hey, Chris, Snapchat, Instagram, they're going to see the video. Well, I think that's what's brought us to this moment that we are in now, right? Is millions of people saw that video for days and nothing was being done. And anger was starting to boil. And people were becoming frustrated because millions saw the video and saw that that wasn't right. Let's say he committed a crime. Police officers are not the judge, jury, and executioner. They can't kill people for committing crimes. We have a system for people who may have been accused of a crime. So even though we saw the video, nothing was done. How do we streamline the process to ensure the fact that taxpayers, once they see the video, that we get that officer, that bad officer, off of duty and no longer left to us in regards to the financial liability of paying him while he's suspended? That doesn't happen in normal jobs. So when do we get the video, Cory?
Okay, so there's a lot in there. The video should be released at the earliest opportunity legally. If somebody submits the video as evidence as part of a complaint and nobody else has seen it, it's part of the investigation until the investigation reaches a point when charges are filed. The investigator, the district attorney or the city attorney, we have the option of releasing it early, but you have to talk to witnesses and get their answers before they have an opportunity to compare notes and change their stories and things like that. There's a legitimate reason to wait a few days. to share video if you're the only one who has it. If it's out there, and it's not an issue about there being secrecy. I do want to say something about, I want to say several things, but you made a comment about the video was out there and it took several days. I'm not in any way downplaying the significance of what happened. In fact, I want to upplay it. What happened, we watched a murder take place. We've watched a couple murders, in my view, take place in the last few weeks. I believe in the legal system, and I also believe that taking 2 or 3 or 4 days to make sure that the charges that are put in writing that get filed with the court are correct. And there are good people working on this stuff, not every time. In Minnesota, they took it out of the local DA's hands to send it up to the state attorney general. That was the right move. And you notice that a day later, the charges were enhanced. Not every time is it going to be perfect, but that's the way on everything. But we as a society have allowed things to get to the point where it's bedlam during those 3 and 4 days. And that's not okay. And we have to address that too. And people are legitimately pissed off that it takes that long. But I personally don't think it's being as pissed about it taking that long as the fact that we're even having to file charges in the first place, right? There's a more fundamental problem that we're not going to fix in those 4 days or those 3 days, whatever it is. There's something else you said about making sure that this information is not kept secret, that we do something about it. I have prosecuted elected officials for corruption. I've been doing it for a long, long time. In California, you're allowed to do it civilly. You can't put them in jail, but you can recover for the taxpayers. I've actually filed multiple cases to recover monies for people. We recover, some of the people in the audience may recall all the corruption in South Bay over the bribes of contractors years ago, and school board members at Southwest and at Sweetwater got in a lot of trouble. I was the lawyer on behalf of taxpayers who sued to recover money from the contractors who were paid through the bribes. I take on people who are corrupt and who abuse City Hall. It's the reason there was a smear campaign against me back in 2015. You can read about it on the blog. We have the documents where people were paid to do a smear campaign against me. But the public is entitled to be served. Justice has to be done. We only accomplish this through transparency. And look, if we're not going to tackle it, we should all just go home. If we're not going to try to make whatever progress we can make, we all should go home. But I got to look at myself when I brush my teeth in the morning. And if I don't do everything I can, and as a lawyer, it means making sure that the public knows what's going on, that the public knows how to take advantage of its government, that the public knows how to advocate for itself, so the public has the best opportunity of getting the outcome it deserves. I can't guarantee the end result, but I can do a pretty darn good job of making sure that the process is as close to level playing field as possible. And that also includes getting rid of dishonest public officials.
Sara, one of the things that Cory talks about is transparency and the complexity of leadership at this particular time. There are lots of issues. How do you reach across the aisle? And we're actually a little bit over time, but how do we reach across the aisle to get policy to create systemic change in a time where, political allies seems to be a thing of the past? How do you, as a mediator and someone who understands conflict, bring transparency and collaboration and build our allies to create policy changes?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that fundamentally one of the issues that kind of is what a lot of other issues stems from is the fact that we don't have trusted institutions. We don't have trusted leaders And that is for a variety of reasons. And, we talked a lot about complexity. Complexity favors the well-connected who can hire a lawyer to figure out what we can do. So part of what we need to do and is just simplify information, simplify regulations so that everyone knows what they're eligible for, how to apply, and also doesn't need to have these compliance lawyers who cost a lot of money to make sure that they're complying with everything. As you know, Alexis, trust building is a really important component of this. So I have a lot of ideas around participatory governance and deliberative democracy and how we can bring more people into the policymaking process. But in terms of really working across the aisle with colleagues in Congress, I think the key is to find some issues that we do agree on and start to make progress there and start to build trust so that we can work on the trickier issues. And in my mind, that issue that right now there's a lot of bipartisan support for is childcare. We actually, here in San Diego, were able to create a coalition with partners across the ideological spectrum, business leaders, unions, community groups, all who knew that we needed to address childcare for essential workers now and do it in a way that preserved our childcare capacity for the future and for when the economy reopens. And I think we've actually seen a lot of bipartisan bills being introduced in Congress around early childhood. Actually, Mitt Romney and Michael Bennet have one. In the House, Elise Stefanik and Colin Allred, a Democrat and a Republican, both in their 30s, introduced bipartisan bicameral legislation on early childhood. So I think that, for me, it's about finding that issue that we do have some consensus on, getting something done on it, and building that trust that creates momentum to address some of the thornier issues.
How is your generation different than the generation before you? What do you offer and what do you know that can affect change that the generation before you haven't done? I'll even tie that to, what are you hoping the signature of your time in office will be?
Look, my generation is very unique, right? September 11th happened when I was in middle school. The entirety of my adult life, the United States has been at war. I graduated college in the Great Recession. I'm in my 30s and the next Great Recession. We've lived through two, what were supposed to be, once in a generation economic events in the span of our early life. And so I think for us, it's really, we also use technology differently than the generations before. I think one of the things that I bring and that our generation brings is not accepting that the way things have always been done is the way that they always have to be done. And really looking at old problems, finding new solutions to them and looking at them through new lenses and finding new ways to actually solve problems. And whether that is finding ways to work across the aisle or finding ways to use technology, I really think that our generation has time and again kind of shown that that's how we do things.
Chris, did you want to ask a question? Are you good?
Oh, I'm loving this. I think, Sarah, you were spot on there. Keep it going, Alexis. You got them rolling.
Yeah. Well, I know, Amanda. I know we're over time. I don't want to respect the process, but
I said I wanted to go back to childcare.
We didn't get to DACA. We didn't get. I mean, there's lots of things we didn't get to.
No, I mean DACA. I guess I apologize. Once again, talking about childcare, single mom, oh man, I wish we could talk about that. How do single moms go back to work when kids can't go to camps? It's unsafe. Oh, so much to talk about. I think I would love to just ask, what is your opinion or your perspective, because that's the name of this segment, on the way that we have handled the response to, and I know this is a loaded question, but how our leadership has handled the response to COVID and to the civil unrest?
Yeah, I mean, so I worked for Hillary Clinton on the 2016 presidential campaign, and I was actually her policy advisor on global public health. At that time, the big epidemic was Zika, but I wrote her pandemic prevention plan, I was working with members of Congress on what we were going to do to better be able to respond to crises like these. So I can tell you, first of all, that it didn't need to be this way and it didn't need to be this bad. I think it's clear that our president and leadership in the federal government really have not been doing the things that we need to do to keep us safe. I think because of COVID-19, because of what we're seeing with the protests and police brutality, we need leaders who can bring us together, but bring us together not around a negative piece, as they'll say in the literature, Alexis, but a positive piece on how we can bring people together and create a system that is more equitable and is more just and move us forward. And right now, what we see from the president is the opposite of that. He's telling people not to wear masks. He's contributing to the division around Black Lives Matter and police brutality and our society. And, I worked for President Obama. I know that we've had presidents who have been able to bring us together. And I think that's what we need out of our leaders right now.
Thank you. And Cory, on the state and local level, how do you feel about our leaders?
Well,
In their response?
in general, on the pandemic, it's hard, right? You have to rely on scientists and people who live in the world of facts. And then the leaders have to take that information into the world of policy. And policy isn't always based on facts. And they have to balance things. And if you take a snapshot at any point in time, you'll say, oh, they did well on this, or they didn't do well on that. Add to that the political environment and the 24-hour news cycle and the world of social media where everybody gets to spout off all the time. It's a tough place to be in. And so the leaders are the ones who just continue moving ahead. They take good information, they continue moving ahead. They are constantly recalculating, reassessing, and we really can only evaluate this in hindsight, right? We're still in the middle of it. And things could get better, things could get worse. We don't know exactly which way it's going to go on any given day. But you need people who are being honest and people who want factual information. And our leaders have, on that spectrum, some have done pretty well and some have done abysmally.
I would love to ask, they are saying that there could be a potential second wave. During that second wave, maybe hopefully both of you are now sitting in office. And now these decisions are coming across your desk. What can the people expect from you as a city attorney and you, Sara, representing the 53rd district? If there is a potential second wave, if the civil unrest have not died down, what would you guys do to help solve some of these issues if you were in office?
Sara, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, we need testing and tracing capacity. We need investments in vaccines and therapeutics, and we need the federal government to be playing that coordinating role so that it's not states competing against each other for these limited supplies, but actually that we have the supplies that we need, and that we're doing the distribution in an equitable way, right? It's not just a question of having a vaccine developed that works. It's also manufacturing that vaccine, making sure that vaccine gets to the people who need it most. And all of that, the federal government has to play that coordinating role. And frankly, has to work with the international community, because we know even if we get rid of COVID-19 here, if it's still in other places, then we're still at risk. We're really need leaders who can think at that global scale. I hope that we pass legislation that not only addresses the reform that needs to happen, but also looks at the root causes, that we can create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We can create a commission that will look at what reparations could look like, that we start to do some of these economic stimuli that get at some of these underlying inequalities, but also that build a more equitable society for the future, that address childcare, because I do think that is one of the most important things that we need to do. And if I'm in office, when I'm in office, it's that holistic approach, looking at not just what we need to do right now in the moment, but the second and third order consequences of the decisions that we're making, and really finding ways to bring people together, and to make sure that we're all agreeing on the goal we want to get to. And then even if we disagree on the tactics to get there, that's okay, because we have these shared values and we have these shared goals.
Are you getting more people funds economically? How are you helping, Sarah? I know that sounded great, and Cory, we'll get right to that. Sounded really good, but financially, what are you doing for families? You're only one voice, but you're going to be our voice, Sarah. So what are you doing for families financially? What are you doing for small businesses that may struggle to ever reopen? So what are the things that directly that you can do that would happen almost instantly? I know politics is not instantly, but if you had that magic wand.
Yeah. So we saw the one-time stimulus payment that went out to families. I think we need to continue that. And I think we actually need to increase the benefit both to individuals, but especially to dependents, because in the CARES Act, dependents only got $500, which means if you're a single mom with 3 kids, you're getting less money than if you're a couple with 1 kid, which is not exactly how need works. And I think we need to keep that in place until we can have some economic indicators that show us that we're out of the worst of this, until our unemployment level gets to a certain percentage, for instance. Similarly, for small businesses, I think we all know some of the challenges that happened in the payment protection program, the PPP. I actually put out a small business plan for what I would do to help small businesses during this pandemic recession. And a big part of that is making sure that the funding actually gets to those small businesses that have the hardest time accessing capital. So making sure we're setting aside funding specifically for community development financial institutions, for other minorities serving financial institutions, prioritizing minority-owned small businesses and women-owned small businesses in federal contracting and procurement grants. And also looking longer term, creating a federal business risk interruption insurance program, similar to how we created the terrorism risk insurance program after September 11th, so that business owners and small business owners know that they can be protected if something like this happens again.
Will you wear a mask?
I'm sorry?
Will you wear a mask?
Yeah.
Okay.
And hers has got rhinestones, right?
No, mine is boring, actually. I was just thinking, I don't know. I've been watching all of the proceedings in Congress, and I have to say I'm very jealous of Nancy Pelosi's mask game. She's like always coordinating. It really puts me to shame.
Susan Davis is going to step down and retire, not run again. Tell me what she has accomplished that you will build on.
And Congresswoman Davis is a mentor and friend, and I've been very grateful for her guidance over the years. I think some of the things that I really want to continue from her legacy, the first is that she often gets awards for being the best member of Congress at constituent services. And I think that really having that constituent services infrastructure in place to make sure that folks in the 53rd district are getting the help they need to navigate the federal bureaucracy is something that I would like to continue and will be really important to me. She sits on the Education and Labor Committee. She's the chair of the subcommittee on higher education and has done a lot of work on apprenticeship programs. I think a lot of her work on education has been really impactful. I want to sit on that committee. You may imagine, want to focus more on early childhood education, but I think that is something that I'm really passionate about and hope to continue of her legacy. And lastly, she's really been the leader of our congressional delegation on foreign policy and on veterans and military affairs issues. And having worked in foreign policy before, I think that is another place that I can really play an important role.
And I don't know where we are, but last
and
thing,
world peace. Just kidding.
what's working in the city? I know you talked about transparency. I know you talk about corruption. I know you talk about, but what's working in the city that you are proud of, that may have required a fight, may have required, a lot of push and pull, some acrimony. It didn't happen easily, but what's working in the city of San Diego that you can say, I'm really proud of our city for being bold and audacious in this particular area?
Two things. One thing that's working in the city are San Diegans. The San Diegans are pretty resilient, pretty resourceful, pretty folks are willing to help take care of their neighbors. Right? San Diegans have done a good job of coming together and trying to help other San Diegans weather the pandemic. I think that says a lot for San Diegans. At City Hall, I think probably one of the things we can all be most proud of is the creation of the Race and Equity Department that Councilmember Monica Montgomery just got through. And the reason that's significant is not just for obvious reasons, but she got elected going against the establishment. She was opposed by all of the big establishment players and even small ones. She was an 110% grassroots candidate. And when she got in there, she didn't just say, this is what I want to accomplish, but she reached out not only to her colleagues, but to the constituents in other districts and said, tell me how I can help you, because there's going to come a time when I'm going to need you to help me and my constituents. And you just saw that pay off with the creation of this department. Imagine anybody else trying to bring that forward. It would have not happened. She did that by putting together a new way of achieving consensus in the city. She reached out to other parts of the city and was willing to help them first. She was willing to say, yeah, I'm gonna vote for you on your thing because I'll need you some other day, as opposed to, this is what you can do for me now. She said, what can I do for you now? And look what we just got. I mean, this is a big deal. So I take no credit for it because she's the one who negotiated it. But she did come into City Hall, sworn to be transparent, and she was, sworn to work with others, and she did, sworn to listen, and swore to stick to her principles. And she just accomplished it. She hit a grand slam. I'm proud to be a San Diegan when I see leaders like that step up and accomplish what they accomplished. And she took some hits for it too, right? Because she didn't vote to cut the police budget. And the day after the vote, when people were, calling her a turncoat and thinking that she was a traitor to the cause, she came out and she doubled down and she said, hey, the dollars went up because people negotiated a raise long before I got here. And we're going to honor our promises. We're going to keep our word because that's who we are. And by the way, this is what I got in exchange. I think that she got a pretty darn good deal. And she was upstanding and transparent and honorable the whole time. So, we don't yet know whether this is a trend because it's the first step. We need to see another one before we have a trend. But I'm kind of proud to be a San Diegan when I see that sort of stuff happening.
we have to wrap it up. I'm so sorry. We went 30 minutes longer, and this is the beauty. This is the beauty of the social club. Sara, I know you have to jump off, so thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to having you as a leader in Congress. So thank you. Go ahead, jump off, and I'll wrap it up.
I really enjoyed the conversation. I'll look forward to continuing it.
You bet.
Sara, looking forward to it.
Right.
So, and thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much, Cory and Chris and Alexis, for giving more time than we had requested. As I was saying, this is the beauty of owning a social club. And while I've had to pivot and take it virtually, there's still magic that transcends somehow through Zoom, right? Through this virtual world. And I feel that we've connected. The only person I've met in the flesh is Alexis. I have yet to meet Chris in person, and now I have yet to meet you, Cory. So I look forward to that day. And I think that we've got a lot of exciting and meaningful work ahead of us. And we like to call, our social club collective genius. And that's what I've seen on the screen tonight. And hopefully that's what people have seen as well. So thank you guys so much. Chris, you are a natural.
Oh yeah.
Are you sure, Chris? You weren't? Were you not a host in your past life or something?
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me on. It's really awesome to get to talk with these such bright minds about varying discussion. So thank you again for the opportunity. And Cory, thanks for taking some of those questions and answering them head on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been fun. Let's do it again next week.
Yeah.
Let's do it. And so next week we do have Ed Holmes. Ed Holmes will be coming on. Ed Holmes is the president of the Stanford Consortium for Regenerative Medicine, where Bella Vista Social Cafe is located. And Ed, he used to go back and forth to Singapore. He helped spearhead the biotech community there with our beloved Jean Yao's father. But I don't know what he's doing. We're going to find out next week. But Ed, before he was leading the Stanford Consortium, he was also the dean of the medical school at UC San Diego. So just a wonderful person. And it'll be very interesting to get his perspective on everything that's going on. So thank you guys again.
Cory, how does that make you feel? They have such a bright mind coming after us.
The first part of what you said cut out. I didn't hear you.
I said, how does that make you feel? A dean of medicine after us.
Better than he's coming after me than before me.
Oh, these are all great minds here. Thank you guys. So you can follow us on Facebook or Bella V TV. We have a YouTube channel. And Alexis, what were you going to say?
I was going to say exactly that.
Perfect. So thank you guys. This is a platform we're growing, and I love you. Thank you for your time. Okay.
Yeah.